She stood at the edge of the porch, barefoot, wearing a faded sundress that clung to her hips in the breeze. The moonlight kissed the curve of her shoulder as she tilted her wine glass, watching it catch the pale silver glow. I shouldn't have been watching her. Not like that. Not while her husband was inside, asleep, and I was supposed to be locking up for the night. But she turned, just slightly, and caught my gaze. Didn't flinch. Didn't scold. Just looked at me with eyes that said she knew exactly what I was feeling, because she was feeling it too. I took the summer job without much thought. My friend Nate's parents owned a lake house up north and needed someone to help around the property, paint the boathouse, trim hedges, clear out the dock. They offered a place to stay, decent pay, and 3 months away from the city noise. It sounded perfect. I was 25, a year out of grad school and floating in that weird space between who I was supposed to be and who I actually was. The kind of jobless, half-hopeful limbo people don't post about. I'd moved back in with my parents and was looking for a reason to leave again. So I said yes. They gave me the upstairs guest room. Said I'd have privacy. The first few days were quiet. Nate's dad, Roger, left early every morning for work in town and came back late, usually smelling like motor oil and chewing on a toothpick. Nate spent most of his time out on the lake with his friends, loud and sunburned and stoned. But she was different. Mara, Nate's stepmom. I remembered her vaguely from the few times I'd visited as a kid, but not like this. Not with the sun in her hair and a slow, thoughtful way of moving, like she was always 1 second ahead of the moment. She was in her early 40s, I guessed, though she wore it like someone who'd made peace with every year. No makeup, no fuss, just quiet, effortless presence. We didn't talk much that first week. A few polite nods, a thank you when I fixed the railing on the back steps. But I noticed things. How she sat alone at dusk with a book and a glass of wine. How her gaze drifted, never quite landing on anyone. How she seemed to carry a stillness that didn't match the noise of the house. One evening, I stayed late clearing leaves from the back patio. Everyone else had gone to bed. Or so I thought. She stepped outside barefoot, cradling a cup of tea. "You don't have to work so late," she said softly, startling me. I looked up, broom in hand. "Couldn't sleep." She nodded. "Me neither." I straightened, suddenly aware of how close we were. "Too quiet." She smiled, faintly. Sometimes the quiet's the loudest part. And that was it. Just a small, quiet exchange. But something shifted in the air between us, like two frequencies lining up for the first time. She lingered a moment longer, then turned and slipped back inside. I stood there for a long time after, broom still in hand, heart thudding in my chest like it had heard something my ears hadn't. The next morning, I woke earlier than usual. Couldn't explain why. Maybe it was the breeze slipping through the cracked window. Maybe the dream I couldn't quite remember. Or maybe it was just the residue of that midnight moment on the patio. I sat up in bed, staring at the pattern of sunlight on the floor, wondering if she remembered it too. Or if to her, it had been nothing. A comment made in passing. An echo of insomnia. When I came downstairs, the kitchen was empty. The coffee pot was warm, half full, with a note beside it in her neat, looping handwriting, out for groceries. "Help yourself. M." It was the first time I'd seen her leave a note just for me. The day passed slow. I painted the south wall of the boathouse, scraping away layers of old blue that flaked off like memory. Every now and then, I'd glance back toward the house, wondering if she'd returned, wondering if she was watching. I told myself it was just curiosity. That's all. A simple reaction to being seen, really seen, for the first time in what felt like months. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. By late afternoon, I found myself on the porch swing, still in my work shirt, drinking a glass of water I didn't really want. The screen door creaked, and there she was, Mara, holding a brown paper bag and squinting at the sun. She looked flushed from the heat, strands of hair stuck to her neck, a thin sweater tied around her waist. "You missed the farmer's market," she said, stepping past me, her voice light. "Didn't know I was invited," I replied, and immediately regretted the way it came out. Too sharp. But she only smiled. Next time, she disappeared into the house, and I sat there with the sting of my own awkwardness, staring at the trees. Minutes later, she reappeared, 2 glasses in hand. "Lemonade," she offered. I nodded, and she sat down beside me, careful to keep a space between us, but close enough that I could feel the warmth of her bare arm just shy of mine. We sipped quietly, the swing creaking beneath our weight. The silence was full, not uncomfortable, but charged. Like both of us were aware of it, and neither wanted to break it too quickly. "Do you miss the city?" she asked after a while. I looked over at her. "Sometimes." But not the noise. She nodded. The quiet can be its own kind of noise. I studied her face, the tired grace in it. The kind of beauty that doesn't ask to be noticed, but lives in the corners, the curve of her mouth, the way she blinked slower when she was thinking. Do you ever feel like you're in the wrong chapter of your life? I asked, surprised at myself for saying it out loud. Mara glanced at me, something soft and knowing in her eyes. All the time. We sat like that for a long time, the lemonade sweating in our hands, the air thick with early summer heat and something else I couldn't name. She didn't look away. Neither did I. Eventually, she stood. "Thanks for keeping me company," she said, her voice quieter now. "Anytime," I murmured, watching her retreat inside, the screen door clicking shut behind her. And that night, I didn't sleep much either. After that evening on the porch, something shifted between us, not in a loud, obvious way, but subtly, like a string had been tightened just slightly, humming beneath everything. I started to notice her presence more keenly. The rhythm of her footsteps upstairs. The way she tied her hair up in the late afternoons. The faint scent of rosemary and lemon on her clothes when she passed me in the hallway. We didn't speak often, but when we did, it was never small talk. Our conversations, brief as they were, always seemed to land somewhere deeper than intended. And between those moments was a silence I found myself craving, not absence, but a kind of permission to simply exist near her. One late morning, Mara found me in the garden, kneeling in the dirt, clearing overgrowth from the base of an old stone path that ran behind the house. The sun was heavy on my back, and sweat clung to my shirt. I didn't hear her approach until her shadow stretched across the soil beside me. "You've got dirt on your face," she said softly. I looked up. She was wearing a wide-brimmed hat and a faded button-down, sleeves rolled to her elbows. There was something effortlessly undone about her, like she'd stepped out of a painting left unfinished. I wiped my face clumsily with my forearm. "Better." She smiled. "Worse, actually." Then she crouched beside me, reaching out with her thumb and gently brushing the smear from my cheek. That touch, barely a second, barely pressure, lit something in me I hadn't felt in years. Her hand lingered a beat too long, and I felt the stillness settle around us like thick air. "Thanks," I said, my voice lower than usual. She didn't reply, just nodded once and stood again, brushing dust from her knees. I watched her walk back toward the house, shoulders squared, her stride steady, like nothing had happened. But something had. That afternoon, I found myself circling the lake, trying to shake off the strange electricity running through my body. It wasn't just attraction. It was something older, deeper, something that knew loneliness too intimately to mistake this for flirtation. What scared me wasn't how she looked at me, it was how I looked at her. Like she was a mirror for every quiet ache I hadn't named. That evening, Mara set a plate of food down on the patio table beside me. Nothing elaborate, grilled vegetables, a slice of bread, chilled water in a sweating glass. She didn't ask if I was hungry. She didn't need to. "Roger's working late," she said, sliding into the seat across from me. "He usually is this time of year." I nodded. "You don't wait up for him?" She shook her head. "Not anymore." We ate in silence. The breeze picked up, carrying the scent of wildflowers and lake water. I watched the wind tug gently at the hem of her dress. When she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "Do you ever feel like your life is happening without you?" I swallowed the lump in my throat. "More often than I'd like." She looked at me then, not past me, not through me, but into me. And for the first time, I didn't feel like a guest, or a worker, or a kid. I felt like someone she had allowed to see her, someone she hadn't turned away from. "You don't seem lost," she said. "Only when I think about where I'm supposed to be," I replied. She smiled at that, faint and sad and real. "Supposed to be," she echoed, like it was a phrase she no longer believed in. We finished eating as the sun dipped low, gold washing over everything. She took my plate when I was done and stood slowly. "Thank you," I said. I didn't know what I meant, for the food, the company, or the moment. She looked down at me. "You're easy to be around." Then she turned and walked inside, her hand brushing the doorframe as she went. I stared after her long after the door closed. It was quiet again, but not empty, not anymore. The house creaked differently after that night. Maybe it was the shift in the weather, the late summer winds rolling in, heavy with the smell of lake water and damp pine. Or maybe it was something else. Something in the air between us that neither of us acknowledged, but both knew was real. For the next few days, we barely spoke. It wasn't avoidance, exactly. More like a quiet agreement to keep things steady. Still, we found each other in small ways. Her hand brushing against mine when we passed in the hallway. My shirt hanging longer than necessary on the clothesline because she'd taken the time to fold it gently, leave it waiting on the porch swing. Little offerings. Quiet acts of noticing. Late one evening, I found her on the dock. The sky was soft with stars, the lake black and silver under the moon. Mara sat at the edge, legs folded to one side, a blanket wrapped loosely around her shoulders. She didn't turn when I stepped onto the planks, just said softly, "Couldn't sleep?" "No," I replied, lowering myself beside her. "You." She shook her head. "The air feels different tonight. Like something's about to shift." I nodded, unsure whether she was talking about the weather or us. We sat in silence, the kind that's hard to come by, the kind that doesn't demand to be filled. I glanced at her, saw how the moonlight softened the lines in her face, how it kissed the slope of her collarbone where the blanket had fallen just slightly open. "I used to come here when Nate was little," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "After I put him to bed, I'd sit right here, just like this. Listen to the water, watch the stars." I didn't say anything, just listened. "It was the only time I felt like myself," she added. "Not someone's wife, not someone's mother, just Mara." I turned toward her, but she didn't look at me. Her gaze stayed on the lake, her profile calm but distant, like she was somewhere years away. "I think I forgot how to be her," she said, quieter now. "The version of me that existed before everything I was became about other people." "You're still her," I said. "I see her." She turned slowly, eyes meeting mine. There wasn't a smile, just stillness. Grateful, aching stillness. "Do you ever wonder," she asked, "why some people make you feel seen when most barely even look?" I nodded. "All the time." The moment stretched between us, gentle and raw. And then she looked down, wrapped the blanket tighter around her, as if she'd said too much. I wanted to reach for her hand, but I didn't. Not yet. It would have broken something delicate, something we were both still figuring out. "I should go in," she said after a while, her voice more composed. I stood and held out my hand. She took it, her fingers slipping into mine with a softness that made my breath catch. I helped her up, and neither of us let go right away. Then we did. She stepped back, pulled the blanket closer, and gave me a small nod. "Good night." "Night," I said. I stayed on the dock long after she'd gone, feet dangling over the edge, staring into the dark water and feeling the weight of something I couldn't name pressing against my chest. I didn't sleep that night. Not from restlessness. From wonder. From the slow, aching realization that what I felt for her wasn't a passing infatuation, wasn't a fantasy. It was something older. Something quiet and real and terrifying. Something that should not be happening, but already was. The days that followed felt like they belonged to someone else's life. I moved through them the way you walk through fog at half blind, aware of everything but unable to hold on to anything solid. I kept working, fixing the broken swing, repainting the front gate, scrubbing mildew off the dock planks. But my hands moved while my thoughts stayed wrapped around her. We hadn't spoken much since that night. Just a few words exchanged over breakfast, a polite nod in the hallway. But our silences had grown heavier, like every quiet second between us was thick with everything we weren't saying. Then came the rain. It rolled in heavy on a Thursday morning, sheets of it falling over the lake like someone had tipped the sky sideways. I'd planned to work on the shed, but instead found myself trapped indoors, watching rivulets run down the windows. Nate was gone for the weekend, off on some camping trip with friends, and Roger was, as usual, staying late in town. The house felt too big with just the two of us in it. I was sitting at the kitchen table, flipping absently through a weathered book someone had left behind, when Mara entered, barefoot, her hair still damp from a shower. She wore an oversized cardigan and loose linen pants. Simple, effortless, and completely disarming. She paused when she saw me, as if considering whether to say anything. Then quietly, "Tea." "Sure." She moved through the kitchen like a dance she'd performed 1,000 times, each gesture slow and practiced. Boiling water, steeping the leaves, pouring into 2 mismatched mugs. No words passed between us, but something in the air felt warmer than it had in days. She slid a mug toward me and sat across the table. For a while, we drank in silence. The only sound was the rain ticking against the windows and the occasional creak of the house settling around us. I couldn't stop glancing at her hands, pale, elegant, resting on the ceramic like they held something fragile. Then, softly, "You're leaving soon, aren't you?" I blinked. 2 more weeks. She nodded, staring into her tea. "You'll forget this place fast." "I won't." She looked up at that. No, I said, voice firmer than I meant it to be. "Not this. Not you." That quiet beat between us stretched again, the way it always did, taut and trembling, waiting for someone to flinch. "I didn't expect you," she said, barely above a whisper. "Not the way you see things. The way you listen." I swallowed hard. "I didn't expect you either." Her eyes flicked down. Then, slowly, she reached across the table. Her fingers brushed mine, not by accident. It wasn't bold. It wasn't a move. It was a confession, one that didn't need words. Her touch was warm, tentative, like she was afraid the moment might shatter if she pressed too hard. "I think," she began, but stopped, as lifting to meet mine again. "I think I miss being wanted. Not in the way people want things, quickly, thoughtlessly. But seen, known." I didn't speak. I couldn't. My hand turned slightly beneath hers, palm to palm. Her thumb traced the faint lines near my knuckle. My heart was beating so loud I was sure she could hear it. Then she stood, pulling her hand back like she'd just remembered where we were, who we were. "I should check the laundry," she said softly, already turning. I stayed at the table, staring at the space where her hand had been, the heat of it still blooming in my skin. The rain didn't stop for hours. Neither did the ache in my chest. The night before I left, the lake was still. The sky had cleared after a day of wind and sudden storms. The air smelled like damp soil and pine needles. I couldn't sleep. Not from restlessness, but because everything inside me felt stretched tight, as if the moment itself had weight. I walked down to the dock. She was already there. Mara sat at the far end, knees drawn up to her chest, sweater draped around her shoulders. She didn't turn when she heard me approach, just moved slightly to the side, a quiet invitation. I sat beside her, close enough to feel the warmth of her skin. "I knew you'd come," she said softly. "I hoped you would." We sat in silence, the kind that had become familiar between us. No need to fill it with words. Just breath, presence, mutual gravity. "I've been trying to decide," she said after a while, "whether I should say goodbye or pretend this never happened." I looked at her, but she was staring out at the water. Her voice didn't shake, but I could feel the edge of it, like someone who's been holding a note too long, finally letting it drop. "You don't have to pretend," I said. "No," she replied, turning to face me, "but I might have to forget." I swallowed. "Will you?" "I don't know," she said. "I don't forget things easily. Not the ones that matter." We fell quiet again. I reached for her hand, and this time, she didn't pull away. Our fingers laced together like they'd been waiting to all summer. "I don't want to make this harder," I said. "But you will," she whispered. "And so will I." She leaned her head gently against my shoulder, and I closed my eyes. I wanted to freeze the moment, to live in it just a little longer. The warmth of her, the hum of crickets, the way her breath slowed near my neck. Then she pulled back, looked up at me, and for the first time, she kissed me. It was not urgent, not desperate. It was soft, intentional, a kind of goodbye. Her lips brushed mine once, then again, slower this time. And when she pulled away, her eyes didn't close. They searched me, memorized me. "Thank you," she said. "For what?" "For seeing me. For not asking for more than I could give. For letting this be what it was." I nodded, throat too tight to speak. She stood, and I followed. Neither of us said what we both felt, that if the world were different, we might have stood here as something more. But the world wasn't different. So she kissed me once more, a final, quiet press of lips that felt like both a blessing and a wound, and walked back toward the house, the dock groaning beneath her slow, steady steps. I stayed behind. Let the night hold me. Let the stars keep her shape. The next morning, I packed before sunrise. Left a note on the kitchen counter. Simple, grateful, true. Thank you for the summer. For the tea. For the quiet. No signature. No promise. Just memory. And as I drove away, the house shrinking in my rearview mirror, I felt it all at once. The ache, the beauty, the silence, and the impossible closeness of two people who were never meant to collide but did. We hadn't fallen in love. We'd simply found each other for a little while in the stillness. And that was enough.